Welcome to Self-Love Ignited. My name is Katie Allen. I'm a certified health and life coach, and we are here to talk all things self-love, self-acceptance, body image, health, and total well-being. You are going to hear from me, plus you'll hear the stories of other women who have transformed this already. They have walked this path, and they have really learned how to love and embrace all parts of themselves. We are here to help you be inspired, motivated, and to help you really transform your relationship with yourself to be a loving and positive force each and every day. This is so important so that you can really reach your big dreams, feel at home in your skin, be healthy on your terms, and live a big life. What are you waiting for? Let's get to it. On today's show, I am interviewing Andrea, who is the founder of Soulful Living with Andrea. She is a transformational courage coach who inspires women in the midst of an identity crisis to seek their own inner truth and guidance so they can transform their life. Andrea has agreed to join us today to talk about her own challenges, her own story, and really sort of how she overcame them. She is here in the hopes that she can inspire you. Perhaps you will see a little bit of yourself in her story, so that you can find that confidence and start taking steps. Without further ado, let's dive in and connect with Andrea. Perfect. All right, Andrea, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. So please, let's just dive right in. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are right now?
Okay, well, I'm a middle-aged woman who's married. I've got 3 beautiful children, and currently we live on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. And we relocated here from Victoria in 2019. We took the leap of faith and we travelled Australia in 2018 in a caravan for 8 months, and we relocated with no jobs, no house, no idea where we were going, just blind faith that we would be led in the direction of which we have landed in beautiful seaside spot. In northern Queensland, and it's just absolutely magnificent. So I'm a transformational courage coach, so primarily supporting women to really take that inner journey so that they can make courageous changes to their life to really follow their heart. So
that's awesome. That's beautiful. I love that you just sort of like packed up and traveled and ended up moving across the country. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I guess the idea was that we would find home when we traveled. I'm quite intuitive, and I really did believe that I would sense where we needed to be. And we actually didn't come to where we have relocated to. We went out and around this area. So we literally left blind, we visited here. My husband and I both visited here before, and it does take an enormous amount of courage to literally walk away from jobs and all of our family and every support system. But I think when you believe in the journey of life enough, and you can get to that element of detachment from the outcome and keep working on that, because it can be hard to detach because we're so programmed, I think, to think good job, good house, good support. Why would you like, we lived in a beautiful home in a small town. All of our friends and family were there. Everything that most normal people would go, why would you leave that? What are you doing? And it was just this desire to actually just stretch and see what life had to offer on the other side, and challenge ourselves to something different. And yeah, it's sometimes I think, oh my goodness, what have we done? And then other times I'm just like this is the best. Like, seriously, we don't need much in life, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hear more about your journey. So, we are here, we're talking all about self-love and your relationship with yourself. So I would love for you to sort of paint the picture for us and share your journey through life, your relationship with yourself, where you started, where you are now.
Cool. So I guess for me, I didn't have a great deal of self-confidence externally. I'm sure if you ask people from my school days, I seemed extremely confident. But I think there's a lot of people that are really good at looking externally confident to hide and shelter from that internal not enoughness. And I guess I suffered that. And I had bouts of bulimia in my later teen years, feeling like my enoughness was attached to what I looked like. And my enoughness was attached to finding a partner and getting married and having children. And in the process of that, I guess that my need to try to control and my need to feel okay was based on not being too fat. And I was really lucky to find a great guy. He was a farmer and was everything that I'd sort of dreamed of. And so I did get married and have children, and we had our first baby when I was not quite 25. And so I sort of had come through that by then. And unfortunately, our son was diagnosed with cancer at 2 days old. So we went through a bit of a journey with him. And he went into remission. And then 3 years later, my husband was killed in a car accident. So in terms of realizing, I guess, that my path was really about what I would classify an identity crisis. So we all have a journey, and lots of people experience different things, and I have done a lot of healing and I've made peace with what I've encountered on my journey. But it was definitely kind of the realization that I didn't know who I was. Like, my identity was locked in being a mum and a wife, and that was my enoughness. And so that probably was the spark of a much more deeper inner journey of working out who I was and what my identity was without external. So without the label of wife, without the label of mother, without the label of a hairdresser or whatever tags I think we tend to place on ourselves, feeling like that's what fulfills us or that's what completes us. And I guess for me, it was that journey of having to complete myself. And the only way that I could complete myself and the only way that I could love myself more was to know who I was first. And so that sort of took me to meditation, and that took me to a lot of inner self-care practices and really beginning to understand the subconscious and the role that plays in diverting us away from what our truth is and where our inner goodness really lies. And so that's sort of the journey I've been on since, well, probably it was a couple of years after my husband's accident. So probably the last 10 years, I would say, of deep inner work and uncovering all of the hidden little agendas of the ego and things like that. But probably one of the biggest aha moments along the way, because I think as you grow and expand and evolve and your awareness sort of shifts. When I first started, I thought it was all about being positive, law of attraction, what you put out is what you get back, and think positively and positive things will happen and things like that. So that was really the commencement of that self-belief journey. But I think the biggest thing for me that has been a game changer was understanding that for me to really have self-belief and really love who I was, I actually had to begin to like the bits that I hadn't liked before. That there is this duality that we need to be able to bring together. And I think for the most part, when I've spoken to people and with clients that I work with, I think a lot of the time we sit in this nothingness, in this kind of center place of being too afraid to shine our light on our gifts and being too afraid to accept what we're really good at, because what will other people think, and the judgment and the tall poppy. And so we shrink back into this nothingness. But on the flip side, I think we're so afraid to accept that we actually have shitty aspects to who we are as well. That I am selfish at times, and I do get self-absorbed, and I can be judgmental, and I can get cranky, and I can be short-tempered. And the minute I began to understand that it was in the acceptance of those things and the willingness to breathe truth into that, was when I truly began to actually be okay with who I was.
That is awesome. I have goosebumps all over just listening to you speak, because you're absolutely right. That's one thing that I think is missing from this conversation a lot is, people talk about self-love and self-acceptance, and they don't mention that we all have those aspects, whether you call them negative aspects or shadow aspects, or, there's different terms, but we all have them. And it's not about being perfect, and it's not about ignoring them. It's really about seeing them and acknowledging that they're there,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for me, I guess, in terms of how that changed my relationships, so that fundamentally changed the relationship I have with myself, but it then began to change the relationships, I guess, that I had, or the boundaries really that I had, because the empowerment for me from that willingness to accept, and that willingness to say, and that willingness to admit that, guess what, I can be self-absorbed, and I can be selfish, and I can have shitty time management, and I can be forgetful, and I can be all of those things. It began to, I was able to create stronger boundaries, because those things couldn't be used against me anymore. I think it's our fear, that underlying fear that we might get caught out, that people might actually acknowledge the stuff that we don't want to acknowledge, and we don't know how to manage that. So it causes that complication, it causes that frustration and that angst, and that takes us away from being able to have loving conversations about how we feel, because we're running and trying to hide from what is true. Yeah. And when you stop running and hiding, it's easier to say, I accept that I haven't, that I've done those things, or I accept that is probably difficult for you to manage, or I accept what my part in this. But it's much easier that if that's not accepted, that's okay, as long as I accept it.
Yeah.
That we're no longer in search of other people being okay with who we are, because we're okay with who we are.
Yeah. 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 When you can really truly look in the mirror, look yourself in the eye, and just know without a doubt that you're good with you, with all the parts of you. Yeah. It stops mattering what other people think. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, of course, changes everything, all your relationships, without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it just, the energy just changes. The harshness of, for me, the harshness, I guess. And that doesn't mean that that's easy. I think that's the other aspect, that understanding that life isn't easy sometimes, and that we can't avoid suffering, and we can't avoid questioning ourselves, and we can't avoid doubting ourselves sometimes. I mean, if you're in a place where you're not doubting and not having some of those lower end kind of emotions, I guess, like doubt or fear or worry, then you would be relatively stagnant, I would think. Because it's when you sort of really stretch out of that comfort zone and really step towards, that expansion of living differently, or thinking differently, or feeling differently, that's when those things sort of come to the surface again. So if they're not coming to the surface, you're relatively stagnant.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So before, you said that when you were younger, you suffered from bulimia for a short time, off and on. So can you tell me if you don't mind going there. You mentioned it, so I'm assuming it's okay.
I'm a pretty open book.
Yeah. Like, did you ever find that your body image and your self-image became one? You know, like if you felt really bad about your body, you felt really bad about yourself. Were those separate, or was that sort of indistinguishable for you?
No, pretty indistinguishable. Yeah,
Yeah.
like what the scales said was the difference of whether I felt okay. And that continued on, although the bulimia didn't,
Mm-hmm.
that perception continued on much further than that, really. And I would still say that there's residual, there's still work there. Like I'm not going to come onto a podcast and say, oh, all of my life is just perfect. It's wonderful. I've created the key to effortless self-love all the time, because again, I think, if that's where you're at, you're not stretching yourself to really get into the trenches with it. So but yeah, definitely the scales, like I can remember being in grade 5 and not eating for a day based on the perceptions of other people. And like I loved those people, but I'm also smart enough on this journey of life to know that primarily a fair amount of our perception and our beliefs and our patterns, they come from external sources. We're sort of programmed, or we learn the rules of engagement for acceptance and love and all those things. So it was definitely, food was an enemy from a very early age, definitely.
Yeah. And then, as you said that though the bulimia didn't stay, that sort of that putting the emphasis of what the scale said was a direct reflection of you, like that stayed on for a long time, and there's still some residual stuff there. Was there any work in particular that you did for yourself to sort of overcome that, or has that been like a natural progression that's just come with everything else in your life that's happened?
I think it's come with a progression of my happiness, if I'm totally honest with you. When I look at it now, the food and the bulimia, and even, short periods of starvation, like after my husband's accident, I didn't eat for 6 days. Like because it's what I could control. And then when I made other hard decisions to move into town and off his family's farm, I spent a couple of weeks living on apples, and that was it, because it was what I could control. So while the self-image is tied in there is the underlining core wound came from not being in control, feeling out of control, feeling like I was in a period of my life where things were happening that I wasn't okay with, and it was causing me pain, and I didn't know how to fix that stuff. I didn't know how to solve that problem. So I grabbed the thing that I could control. And I think that that's probably a massive underlining thing for a lot of people, is that, oh, I can control my weight, I can control my eating, that's what I can control, that's what makes me feel safe. And so that's what we do. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and especially like you said, it's changed as your happiness has changed, and so often we look for happiness on the scale, or we look for confidence on the scale, or we look for, whatever, like fill in the blank, right? We think that somehow that is tied with the number that the scale reflects back, but
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
at the end of the day.
that's right. And I think for me, when I say it was dependent on my happiness, like it was dependent on my healing journey, because I began to realize that I didn't need to control that. And so, like, I'm remarried now to a wonderful man. And for me, I guess there's elements of that the love and contentment that I find outside of myself directly impacts the inside of myself. And what I mean is, it's not that, oh, if he loves me, then I must be lovable. It's not that. It's that he provided the safety and the security of loving me enough until I learned how to love me enough. And I can't deny that. Like, I can't deny that. Would I be who I am today and feel how I feel if he wasn't a part of this journey? So because all credit to him, because he took me on as a broken woman. He took on two babies. My son was 8 months and my eldest was 3. And so they were, I don't know, 3 and 5 when we got together. So he took on somebody else's 2 little boys. He took on a broken widow who was, trying to work herself out. And he has stood beside me every step of the way and is just incredible. And so how can I walk around not being okay with who I am when I have someone as amazing as that, that's willing to hold the space for me in such a magnificent way? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. Yeah. So this podcast, why we're here, we're talking all about self-love and your story, your sort of transformation into self-love through your life, through all these different things that you've gone through. Do you identify with the term self-love, or, is it more self-acceptance? Is it like, does self-love sort of land for you, or is there something else that feels better, feels more true?
I'd probably have to admit that when I hear the word self-love or I see it written, there is a definite sort of feeling of that it's kind of been tarnished a bit. It's because the focus has been on that positive stuff. So love yourself enough, feel amazing, you're so worth it. And to me, in some ways, that's bypassed what I think is the most important aspect. And that's wholeness. That it's self-acceptance. It's knowing that we are enoughness, and that wholeness of all aspects. And I guess you have to love yourself enough to get there. But I think it's that the connotation of loving yourself has quite a negative connotation. That means you're arrogant. That means you think you're better than other people. So for me personally, there's other words that feel more congruent to what I think the journey of self-love really should be about.
Yeah.
And it's that wholeness, knowing that what makes you whole is being able to recognize all parts and accept all parts and be okay with all parts.
Yeah. I love that wholeness, because it really is like, like you said earlier, we all have those shadow pieces. There's those parts of ourselves that maybe aren't the prettiest to look at, those parts of our personalities, and self-love is not about ignoring those or glossing over them. It's really about seeing them, seeing ourselves for all that we are, and still being good with what we see.
Yeah. And that's the thing, loving ourselves anyway.
Yeah.
But perfectly imperfect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like
absolutely.
that's the key to kind of that journey for me, is just perfectly imperfect.
Beautiful. So you are a coach, you are an entrepreneur. How has your journey towards this wholeness, towards the self-acceptance, the self-love, how has this journey affected your path to being an entrepreneur?
I guess and like most coaches would, depending on who you're working with, because it's been a lived experience, because like I said, I work with people that primarily feel like they're in an identity crisis. Like they've come to that point in their life where life is not working. They know it's not working. They feel totally spent and overwhelmed. They've given everything to everybody else, and they don't understand why people can't see their struggle. It's like they can't communicate it. They're misunderstood. They're not valued. And so because I feel like I've walked that journey, it's like, I guess it's like working with your younger self, really. And you can feel that struggle so much but I know the faith I have in people because I've had to have that faith in myself. That when you have been the one that has actually turned stuff around and really shone a light on what felt pretty uncomfortable, there's that strength in knowing that anybody can do that. And so I guess it's, for me, like I said before, in terms of having such a supportive second husband, and you know, he loved me enough until I loved me enough. It's almost like it transpires into, I believe in my clients enough until they believe it.
That's beautiful. That's pretty damn amazing, actually. Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. You know, most coaches, we do tend to work with younger versions of ourselves, because, you know, we walked that path and we've seen the steps and we've seen the heartache and we've gone through it. And I think it's a really powerful thing to be able to mentor others who are sort of walking a similar journey to what you've been on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, like, I guess the events of my life are what brought me here, essentially. Like, I can't deny that I am who I am because of what I've experienced. But identity crises happen in divorce, they happen in motherhood, they happen in careers. This identity crisis and not knowing who we are without the labels is so prevalent, it's not funny. Like, so many people who can't speak their truth because they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
They literally don't know what their truth is. They just know how they feel. And they just know, there's, like, for me, there's no surprise that mental health is so rampant, because there's so many people that don't know who they are.
Yeah.
And yeah. And, you know, I've been through that journey too, I guess. You know, I've suffered mental health and found my way out the other side. So, and I absolutely attribute that to knowing that I was somewhere I had either outgrown or didn't want to be anymore, whether that be the type of person I was, or whether that would literally be where I was living, or how things played out. And that's what brought on my mental health, was knowing that I couldn't be here anymore, but I didn't know how to get there because of the impact those decisions would make.
Yeah.
And you have to know that you're enough anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you look back at your journey, you know, everything that you've been through, all the steps that you've taken to get here today, what was sort of the most powerful, I want to say tools, but I'm not sure if tools is the right word. Like the most powerful things that sort of helped you along the way. Was it, you know, did you have a coach yourself? Self-help books? Did you take courses? Was it like, what were the things that really helped you get here?
It's kind of like, what did I not do more than what did I? So no, the very first thing was, it was an internal knowing. So I had a time in my life where I literally felt like I was completely unlovable. I would never find happiness again, because I was so broken and had too much baggage. And it was like an internal I guess it was my inner guidance, but at that stage I hadn't really done any self-help, so I didn't know what it was. But it was a distinct voice that said, your happiness is your responsibility. And that was a defining moment for me, in terms of not looking outside of myself for the happiness, that I had to be happy anyway. And I had to choose what I was going to do in life that would bring the most amount of happiness that I could, knowing that I had deep trauma that needed healing as well. So, but the first thing really, the practical thing, I guess, was self-help books. So Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. I was a notorious people pleaser, which is why it was so hard to make decisions and be able to be okay with them. So Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway was definitely the first book. Then I've been on silent retreats. I learned meditation and went on silent retreats. I then sort of, once I did meditation, doTERRA. So doTERRA essential oils kind of found me. It was just the bizarrest thing, but they kind of found me. I didn't go in search of them. That was a massive, massive turning point in my life, because of the community that brought me, the community of spiritual people, the community, like, so human design, which, have you heard of human design or work with human design?
I've heard of it. I don't know very much about it though.
Yeah, so it's based on when you're born, and it gives you a design of different aspects to your personality, and it's really great for business as well, because it helps you understand aspects of what works and doesn't work. But anyway, so people that were into human design, using essential oils for the emotional side of things, really finding out about the subconscious and how that works. And then I got my own coach. So my sort of sticking point, I guess, that was really getting in the way of being able to embrace us traveling and moving and that next chapter, was a money story, which so often shows up for people. And I was really sick of feeling guilty, and I was really sick of doubting that we had what it takes to be able to follow our dreams. And I think, like most people, you get to the edge of the cliff and you're that spent that you're just like, I bloody have to do something with this, because I can't live another day worrying about this. And so I ended up with a coach who, in fact, like most things, what I thought I was going to that coach for was slightly different to what I ended up going through, but she was phenomenal. And just courses along the way, just different things along the way that resonate in terms of shifting energy and understanding how we can manifest. So like, I have a list in front of me. I journaled for on and off for probably about 4 years about our trip around Australia and our beachside change. And word for word, you can go back and read that journal. I journaled before our daughter was born, word for word, her name, everything. We had a little girl. I've used mantra. So mantra in terms of when I had postnatal anxiety and post-traumatic stress when I had my daughter, mantra was really helpful in just being able to reset those neural pathways. EFT, absolutely love emotional freedom technique, and using that is just been fantastic. And probably the biggest thing that was, I probably didn't realize that was one of my first steps, because we started it probably 13 years ago. But we started doing gratitude at the dinner table. So the boys were only 3 and 5 at the time, but gratitude has played a massive role in my life, and supporting us to be able to look at what we do have and not what we don't have. And that was, I sort of stepped towards that before I really knew that was a self-help tool, to be honest. It was super, super important for me to be able to guide my children into not growing up with a chip on their shoulder, and not growing up feeling like they were really hard done by, even though they were. Like, they don't remember their dad, and that, that pains me no end. But it is a choice whether we sit and stay in that as our focus, or whether we choose to be able to see what else we still have. And so gratitude was, one of the biggest things as well. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So many different things. And I think that's most of us, right? It's not just one single thing that gets you there. Normally it is a whole mishmash of things. And
absolutely.
It's just finding what works for you, like your best combination, really.
And I guess the understanding of, like, one is not, it's not just one way. It's not just one thing. And it's not just, I've done that, why am I not feeling $1 million? Like, self-love or wholeness, or the subconscious, is designed to keep us safe. It is designed to keep throwing out little landmines to throw us off course, so that we don't go towards the things that make us feel great. And I know that sounds so counterproductive, but that's what we're up against. In the time of physical danger, it served us really well, because it kept us away from dangerous animals. But now, the biggest danger we have to our survival is our emotional health. Like, we live in, well, you and I both live in Australia. Like, the amount of dangers that we sort of have are pretty limited.
Yeah.
But we got saber-toothed tigers running around in our head every day. Absolutely. And so understanding it's there for a reason. This stuff is there for a reason. It's there to keep us safe. But again, we get to choose whether we're going to go, oh, I thought I'd done the work. That's it. I'm not fixed yet. It's a lifelong. It's loving yourself enough to keep loving yourself, really.
Yeah. 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 No doubt. So if there was one exercise or practice that you would recommend for listeners, maybe they're at the beginning of this journey, maybe they're not really sure how to start loving themselves or even liking themselves. What would you recommend for people who are right at the very beginning?
Such a good question, because I just love so much of this stuff. At the very, very, very beginning, I would definitely recommend even a commitment to a daily mantra. So training your brain for what you want to feel, even though you don't feel it, because belief comes from that repetition. And while you probably don't believe it now, if you continue that repetition and you continue to the neural pathways in the brain and head to that positive self-reinforcement, you'll eventually begin to feel better. And that can be an easy, simple, because this is the thing, and I'm sure you would agree with this. Most people that seek out a coach, or in particular the coach of which I am, because obviously we attract, the clients with the particular need that we have. So when someone's in an identity crisis, they're usually fairly overwhelmed by the time they get to me. They're spent with whatever situation is not working for them. So to overload with go and do A, B, C, D, and E, it's not going to happen. But a simple writing out a sentence of how you want it, like what you want to believe about yourself one day. So I can't even think of one now. That's a bit silly, isn't it? But, I'm always striving to be the best that I can be, and I love myself unconditionally. So it's not like I'm fantastic, because that's really hard to believe if you feel really crappy. But striving to be the best that we can be, that doesn't matter where you are on that line. If you are striving to be that whatever the best you can be is your best, and that's enough.
Yeah.
And popping that on a mirror and just continuing to come back to that and continuing to come back to that until some of the lightness and some of the overwhelm maybe shifts enough for then being able to add different elements. But I guess the first absolute fundamental key, without doing anything, and it's such a hard thing to recognize when you are in despair, or you're in overwhelm, or you're in, just feeling pretty cruddy. But the absolute number one thing is that people have to understand it's their responsibility. Even if you have people in your life that it's just like, if they could just do this, then it would be better. Or if that situation just changed, then I'd feel better. Or it's the hardest thing to actually accept, but nothing will change if you don't.
Yeah.
Our happiness, our self-belief, our outcomes, that is our responsibility.
Absolutely. If I could stand up and give you some applause. Shout that one from the rooftops for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that that's challenging, in different aspects of my life, even coming up here and changing our whole life. And it was challenging because, our security, we didn't have jobs, and, things were a bit challenging. But I knew that it was our responsibility. I knew that it was my responsibility to keep coming back and centering into what is our value system.
Yeah.
What do we value the most? Do we value high-paying jobs the most, or do we value family connection? What do you value the most?
Yeah. And then standing up and making it happen for yourself, because nobody else is going to do it. Ever.
Yeah. And that's right. And I did a post the other day on my Facebook page, and I shared two of them, and then someone added the third, and I was like, oh yeah, that's perfect, because to me there's 3 A's, and that is awareness. You cannot You cannot get yourself out of a situation if you are not aware of what put you there or what kept you stuck there. And the reality is that we don't know what we don't know, because if we knew it, we wouldn't be in that position. If we knew what was keeping us stuck and feeling like crud, we wouldn't be stuck. So we have to have awareness. That is the key to the healing journey as far as I'm concerned. But the key to the healing is acceptance. Acceptance of who we are. The good, the bad, the ugly, the fabulous, the amazing, the not so great. The acceptance of all of that. The acceptance of everything that's made us who we are. The life experiences, the people, the jobs, the whatever. Like the acceptance of, well, what got me to who I am today. But then the action was the third one. The action in becoming who I was always meant to be. Because we're already that person. We just got lost along the way. And the action of going back to that center, going back to that wholeness. Because a baby isn't born into the world with no self-belief and no, like, we are born as pure and utter just divineness until we learn that maybe we're not, or we learn that we need to shut that down so that that person will be okay, or we need to, step up there or step down there, and we begin to learn the rules of engagement. And really, for me, the path to that true self-belief and self-love and wholeness is unlearning everything that's taken us off our true path.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. There's so much good stuff in here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I love talking about this stuff, because I just love the transformation that people just take. It's so good. Yeah.
So if our listeners want to get in touch with you, where is the best place for them to do so?
The best place would be, I'm an avid Facebook girl, so my Facebook page is Soulful Living with Andrea. So they can track me down on my Facebook page, send a message through if they'd like to. Also, same name for my website, soulfullivingwithandrea.com.au. And I'm on Instagram. So it's all the same. It's just Soulful Living with Andrea. You'll find me on those places. Yeah. So, and yeah, like I have little mini workshops that, so my last one that I ran was intentionally increasing self-belief. I've done one about the graceful art of saying no. So just little 1 hour, quite economically sound, if that's the right way you say it. They're pretty inexpensive. And then I do 4-week programs. So the next one's about to kick off, called Free to Be Me. And it's all about this stuff. And then obviously the option of working one-on-one in a 3-month program. So, yeah.
Beautiful. So I'll make sure to put all the links and everything in here. So
cool.
Listeners can find you really easily.
Awesome. Thank you.
Beautiful. All right, Andrea, thank you so much for being here.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me on. I really admire the work that people like you do in being able to support the community and just have really juicy, in-depth conversations about all this good stuff.
So needed. It's so needed. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. If you want to get in touch with Andrea, the links to all of her socials as well as her website are in the show notes. As well, if you want to be part of the Self-Love Simplified Facebook group for more inspiration, more tips, and more motivation to get you walking that self-love journey, please join us. The link is there as well. Thank you for being here. Have an absolutely beautiful day. Here is to loving yourself and embracing all that you are.